Hi, I'm Brett Parker, multimedia specialist for Dairy Foods Magazine. And today we're speaking with Miguel Freitas, VP of Nutrition and Scientific Affairs at Danone US, as he explains the relationship between dairy products and gut health with data that can add value to the average consumer's health. Miguel, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Brett, for having me.
What do you feel makes yogurt one of the best dairy foods for supporting gut health, according to the latest science?
Well, fermented foods in general are quite beneficial to the gut. And I'm not sure if you read the latest dietary guideline for Americans, but for the first time, they actually mention that Americans should start incorporating foods in general into their diet. But talking about dairy and talking about yogurt, there's some specifics in dairy and yogurt that makes it even a little bit more special. So when we're talking about consuming general fermented foods, we know that we are incorporating bacteria into your gut, and generally those are considered good beneficial bacteria that can help somehow improve the state of the microbiome. However, when we bring in the dairy component, we also bring in an opportunity to include bacteria, specific bacteria that sometimes are also called probiotics that have been studied to provide particular benefits. Once again, not all bacteria are probiotics, not all fermented foods are probiotics, but in general, most of the fermented foods are beneficial to the gut. So I would like to give a little bit more of the specifics around probiotics because once again, not all of them are probiotic specific and studied. So if you take a product like one of the known products like Activia, we incorporate a probiotic in there, which is a particular Bifidobacterium lactis that actually has been tested in clinical studies to provide a particular benefit. And I can go a little bit more in detail into that. But there is a misconception that all fermented foods, even all fermented dairy foods, contain probiotics. And once again, that's not really the case. So if you take Activia, for example, we spent many years, over 20 years of research, studying the specifics of the Bifidobacterium lactis that is incorporated in Activia. And our research continuously shows that if you consume Activia, you reduce the frequency of minor digestive discomfort, things like bloating, gas, abdominal discomfort, and rumbling, which are very much associated to gut health. There's other probiotics, on the other hand, that can be incorporated also in fermented dairy products. And there's another one from Danone called Dan Active, which includes a Lactobacillus casei. So as you can see, it's different from a Bifidobacterium lactis. And in this case, this Lactobacillus casei helps support immune function. So again, yogurts and maybe even other fermented foods can be a great vehicle for certain probiotics because not only they are the right matrix for them to grow, but they're also foods. And in comparison to supplements, when these foods get into your stomach, which is very acidic, these foods help buffer the acidity of the stomach and increase the chance for these tiny bacteria to survive in the intestine and stay alive where they actually have their benefit. So, bottom line, dairy fermented foods are really the best vehicle to incorporate specific probiotics into your gut.
So, considering everything you just said, in terms of probiotics research, when it comes to dairy product like yogurt, like if that is something that you were to consume every day on a scheduled basis, do you find that there would be exponential benefits over time with like the daily aspect?
Yes. So first, it's not a magic bullet, right? It's not that you eat it once and you get all the benefits you can get from a yogurt that contains probiotic. But it's true that the continuous consumption of the product is important because most of these bacteria that are incorporated in the fermented dairy products, in a yogurt, for example, they don't necessarily remain in your gut for a very long period of time. So what we call, they don't colonize the gut permanently. So if you stop consuming the product, then after 1 or 2 weeks, you also stop seeing the benefit of the product. And let's not forget that yogurt and dairy products in general, in addition to cultures and to probiotics, they also include high quality protein, just like milk, and other important nutrients that milk also includes, like calcium and vitamin D. So it's the whole package. And we need that on a permanent base. If we don't, those are all nutrients of public health concern. Nobody's getting enough vitamin D and calcium. So yogurt is also a perfect vehicle to bring those nutrients. And that needs to be consumed on a regular basis. I would like to bring in here another topic which is quite recent and maybe important for your audience, is that the FDA has released a claim on yogurt and diabetes recently, a year and a half or so ago, following a petition made by Danone US. There's been a growing body of research suggesting that regular yogurt consumption over time can reduce the risk of developing type 2 diabetes. As you can understand, it's one of the most important and rapidly raising health concerns in the United States, hand in hand with obesity. So the benefits are not only around gut health alone. And this is the first time the FDA has actually allowed yogurt companies to make this claim, which is called the qualified health claim. And it's one of the only qualified health claims that actually relate to a single complex food product, because originally most of these claims were either related to specific ingredients in the food, like certain fats or certain vitamins. But we were very proud that this happened, and this is really a reflection of what the known is, and our mission to bring healthier food to as many people as possible is a generic category claim. Any yogurt company could make it.
Well, we've been talking a lot about yogurt, but if a person wants to find an easy way to add more probiotic-rich dairy foods to their daily routine, do you have any suggestions other than yogurt?
Other than yogurt, well, I love yogurt. I grew up in Europe, and eating yogurt was part of the dessert. That's what my parents gave me for dessert, lunch and dinner, typically plain with little fruit and some sugar, maybe. But I understand everybody is different, and not everyone likes yogurt in general. But there's other trends and things that are happening, within, even within fermented dairy products that are more kefir based, or drinks that don't have or have a different taste appeal to consumers. I still think yogurt is one of the best options for the reasons we just discussed, to include probiotics into your daily diet. And you can mix it with fruit. You can have it plain. You can have it sweetened. We can have it fat. We can have it with no fat, with low fat. I mean, there's so many options that you can put it into recipes. Just don't warm it up. Don't blend it too much, because then you will be inactivating the cultures that are so good for your gut. So it's better to just keep it at its natural state. So for me, yogurt is still the ideal food to incorporate probiotics into your diet.
Yeah, we've touched down a lot about what goes on in your gut when you ingest yogurt, but I'm just wondering how long would it take for a consumer to notice any physical benefits? Does the consumer data reflect this at all?
Well, the studies reflect, clinical studies can show us how long does it take for a particular probiotic to have a benefit in your gut. And that really depends on what you're studying and the probiotic particular strain that you're studied. Once again, it's not a magic bullet, so I wouldn't expect any probiotic to work from one day to the other. Typically, when a probiotic product is consumed, such as a yogurt with probiotic cultures, you ingest it, it passes through the stomach, it gets to your intestine, first the small intestine, then the large intestine, where it encounters your microbiome, which is a quite complex system of other trillion bacteria in there. So it's a very complex ecosystem that is going on in your large intestine. And these bacteria that are coming in will have to interact and will have to somehow collaborate with the other bacteria as well as with all the cells that we have in the small intestine and with the colon. So for certain benefits, it can take 1, 2, 3 weeks. For other benefits, maybe it can take longer. So if you're just been on a course of antibiotics, for example, during 10 days, and if you decide, or your healthcare professional decides that you should be incorporating probiotics into your gut, I would expect that quite quickly, within a week or so, you would start feeling that it's a little bit more balanced and you're a little bit more regular when it comes to the side effects of the antibiotic. And if I can go back to the example of Activia, which is not at all what we've studied in relationship to antibiotics, but we do know that the benefits of Activia start being noticed after 2 weeks of consumption. So the studies we've done, we've chosen people that tend to have digestive issues such as bloating or gas or discomfort, and they consume the product for 2 weeks versus a placebo product. And after 2 weeks, we saw a reduction of some of those symptoms compared to the placebo. So it really depends on the probiotic. It really depends on what you're studying in your body, but it's not a magic bullet, and typically takes a few weeks to start working.
Now, this next question's in two parts. On social media, you have trends like fiber maxing and discussions about the gut brain axis going on all the time. Do you feel that dairy factors intelligently into these conversations? And do you feel that people have misconceptions about gut health?
Fibermaxing is definitely a trend, and thank you for bringing it up because so many people talk about protein, right? And I think dairy foods are a perfect vehicle for bringing protein, and usually it's an animal protein, and it's a very high quality protein, as you probably know. And now we're seeing a shift in the social media with folks talking more about fiber and this fiber maxing and having as much fiber as possible. And this is not only in social media, because we're also seeing expanding research around fiber and gut health, and very similar to protein, which is not all protein sources are the same. Plant versus dairy protein, they're very different. Amounts are also important. The same thing with probiotics. Not all probiotic strains are the same. Amounts might or not be important depending on the clinical studies. Fiber is the same thing, Brett. Not all fibers are the same. Some are soluble fibers, some are insoluble, some are prebiotic fibers, some are more of a bulking fiber. And we are starting to understand much better what are the amounts and the types of fiber, the diversity of fiber that we should be consuming to improve certain functions in our body. So when it comes to gut health, of course, fiber has been studied to improve gut health in many different aspects, and even outside of gut health, like calcium absorption, fiber has been studied in those endpoints with particular prebiotic fibers. And I think dairy products, although they inherently uh, have protein and inherently are a good matrix to have cultures because they can ferment the milk. I think they're also a big opportunity to bring fiber in with dairy products, and maybe particularly prebiotic fibers, which are more of a soluble fiber and that um, can help increase the number of certain beneficial bacteria in your gut, like bifidobacterium. That's why sometimes we call a prebiotic fiber a bifidogenic effect, because bifidobacterium like to feed on prebiotic fibers. So they're increasing their numbers. And bifidobacterium are really caretakers of our gut. And we've been noticing that when people tend to have certain gut related disorders, they tend to have less bifidobacterium. So more bifidobacterium is beneficial. So that's to answer the first part of your question. I hope I did it. To answer the second part of your questions about misconception, I would say that the most common misconception that I see around yogurt and gut health is that people automatically think that yogurt contains probiotics, and even they label it probiotic. And as we've discussed, as I mentioned before, that's not always the case, Brad. Not all probiotics are the same. Not all fermented foods contain probiotics, because in order to be able to call it a probiotic, it has to be studied in a clinical setting, in a randomized controlled clinical study. And when we have proven that this particular strain has provided a benefit, either reducing frequency of minor digestive issues or improving your immune system in certain ways, then that's when I am comfortable calling it a probiotic. I am not comfortable calling it a probiotic if it's just a bacteria that is present in a kombucha, for example. So it's really important for consumers to do a little bit of research to understand what they're looking for. Are they looking for a specific benefit? And these days, it's easy because most labels include the probiotic names, the probiotic strains, and with the tools we have, with AI, with the internet, it's quite easy if you do some research to understand if there's actually any clinical studies around that particular strain. So that's one misconception. And then we also know from some of our surveys that some people don't necessarily understand the whole universe of biotics. For example, prebiotics, probiotics, postbiotics. Some people think it's all the same, it's all biotics, but they're not all the same. Some can do the same thing, some can do very different things. And I believe over 70% of consumers actually believe that prebiotic and probiotic are quite the same thing. And again, that's not at all the case. And then finally, I keep saying this, but it's not one thing fixes everything. So there's not a single ingredient or a single prebiotic, or I would say a single biotic that works alone, and that you can just put in a yogurt cup, and that's it. You have everything you need for your health. So this all comes together. Nutrition is important. Probiotics are important. By nutrition, I mean macronutrients, protein, vitamins, minerals, and so on. And then bacteria, probiotics are important. Fiber is important. So I think people need to think about all of this as a whole. And it's quite difficult to have every single thing in one cup of yogurt. So once again, there's many options out there for many consumer needs. And I think Danone provides actually a lot of those options.
Mm, absolutely. Well, a lot of great information there, but I'm afraid that's all the time that we have for today. Miguel Freitas of Danone, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Brad.
And thank you all for watching.